Our next speaker is someone who has done extensive research on aging, dementia, and psychiatry. A well-known professor of psychiatry and brain sciences, a leader of the Lancet Standing Committee on Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and Care. Someone whom Nightingale Hammerson is so proud to have as a trustee. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome Professor Gill Livingston.
Thank you very much, Clemens, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to talk about behaviour and distress in care home residents with dementia, because that's what Nuno asked me to talk about. And I'm going to talk about why dementia matters and what dementia is, because I know that this is a very mixed audience. So some people are professionals and other people are families and residents here. And then I'm going to talk about behaviour and dementia, what the behaviours are, how common they are, what they mean and what to do about them to help. So probably most of you know dementia is or perhaps the major global health problem. It impacts on individuals, so it's the most feared disease in the UK and in many other countries. Nobody wants to develop dementia. It impacts on families who help, and it impacts on society because it costs more money than anything else to look after the people with dementia. It's the number of people with dementia globally was 55 million in 2019. It's expected to nearly triple by 2050, and that's in line with the aging population. Currently, there are nearly 1 million people with dementia in the United Kingdom. It was said that it cost 242 billion in 2015, and there's expected to be a 50% increase in costs by 2040. So dementia impacts everyone, and it's common enough that people of my age have, it's very unusual for people not to have a parent-in-law, or an aunt or uncle with it, and even at my age, beginning to impact on people of our generation as well. And this shows the aging population up till 2020, before there was a quite remarkable dip with COVID for the first time, and it's now going back up again. So the age expectancy, amazingly, in the UK decreased by 2.5 years over COVID, which was the first time for at least 100 years, but it's continuing to go back up again. More people live to be older, which is great, but that means that more people develop dementia because they're still alive at an age which many of their parents were not. So what is it? What's this dementia? I think people mostly know, but this is a quote from film director Louis Buñuel. He said, and I just think it gives a feel of it, you have to begin to lose your memory, if only in bits and pieces, to realise that memory is what makes our lives. Life without memory is no life at all. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think it's people's fear. Our memory is our coherence, our reason, our feeling, even our reaction. Without it, we are nothing. I can only await the final amnesia, the one that can erase an entire life, as it did my mother's. And I think that also shows that people whose parents have dementia are worried that they too are going to develop it. So this is a history which is generally available, so I thought I'd go through it. So this is Winston Churchill, and his history was documented by his personal physician, Lord Moran. So he started in 1944 with what might have been very early symptoms: a decrease in concentration, quarrelsome and irritable, argued with key allies. He might have also been a bit stressed about the war. In 1949, he had a stroke. He had a right hand and arm weakness. He made a good physical publicity. There was no physical recovery, was no publicity. He then had 2 more mini strokes. In 1951, after having had 3 strokes, which nobody knew about, he was returned as Prime Minister. He had a deterioration in memory function. Documents were condensed to a single paragraph. That's my preferred way anyway, but Churchill was really quite good at them. He had a poor memory for world events, and my patients may argue that it doesn't really matter if they know who the Prime Minister is and who does nowadays, but that probably matters if you are the Prime Minister. He had a stroke during a state banquet in 1953. And kept working. People knew then he'd had a stroke. His speeches were rehearsed many times, although physically he was well. In 1954, he was confused. In 1955, he resigned. In 1966, he died immobile and with severe dementia. So I think that gives an indication that often it's not really clear when it starts. It's often hidden. People keep doing things that they can't necessarily manage in the same way, with a sort of denial that there was a problem, and it can happen over a very long period of time. So another way of looking at it, and I talked about some of these things, is it's a very, very important and relatively neglected area. It's long regarded as neither preventable or treatable. It affects a person with dementia, the family and society. But now we know there are potentially modifiable risk factors, and in high-income countries like the United Kingdom, there has been a 25% reduction in the incidence of dementia over the last 20 years. So that means there are more people with dementia because more people are living as they're older. But if we look at the number of people between 65 and 75, there's been a 25% reduction in the number per thousand who have dementia. So more people, but fewer per thousand or per 100,000. Medically, we call it a decrease in cognition from previously attained levels. So you look at what people could do before, rather than it's a personal thing. And to the extent it affects social or activities of daily living function. So what else is it apart from memory and function? It's at some point, almost everyone has changes in behaviour, and we sometimes call that neuropsychiatric symptoms. There's a physical deterioration, people's blood pressure drops and they lose weight, they frequently fall. And in late dementia, at the very end, the thing that people really fear, and I have to say that most people who die and have dementia die with rather than of dementia, but the great fear, there's a loss of walking, loss of swallowing, loss of speech. And for the family carers, there's a very high incidence of stress, depression and anxiety, and that's not surprising. So what are the behavioural symptoms? I'm eventually getting onto the topic. They are disturbed perceptions, thought, mood, or just change in behaviour. It's the important thing to know, it's part of the illness, and the person with dementia cannot control them. They don't do it on purpose, and they can't stop just because you ask them. There are biological changes, and there's a sign of distress, but there's also changes, other things in the environment which can make a difference. And they may come separately, or they may come in a cluster. Most commonly, they come in a cluster, such as agitation, psychosis, seeing things that aren't there, or mood disorders. So symptoms vary according to the dementia type, but that's a sort of technical thing which probably doesn't make much difference when you're seeing the person in front of you. So in Lewy body, people more often have visual hallucinations. In vascular dementia, they more often have apathy. But each of the symptoms can occur in any type of dementia. So what's agitation? Agitation is inappropriate verbal, vocal, or motor activity. So that's the people that sort of drives families crazy, who are opening all the drawers and over again, taking everything out and leaving it on the floor, who walk around all the time, who move everything all the time. It's purposeless, and it can be shouting out, physical, verbal aggression, wandering. There's thought generally to be that the person feels anxious inside, but it has a behavioural component. It's not just the feeling, it's the doing. And it's often thought to be a form of communication, that somebody is saying, I don't feel good, even if they're not specific about what way they don't feel good. How common are these symptoms in care home? Well, more than 90% of people with dementia in care homes have one or more symptoms, so very, very common. And overall in a care home population, and when Claire was talking, I looked up. So the study that we did had 1,489 people in it, so 1,500 nearest gamut of 100 care homes in Britain. And irritability, agitation, disinhibition are the highest, were most common. Often people are admitted to care homes because they have these symptoms. They're agitated, they don't sleep, they're depressed, families cannot go on. We all need to sleep sometimes. Often what happens is they continue to have these symptoms in the care home, but instead of being cared for by a family member or a carer, they have a team and they work in shifts, but it's still not one person per individual. And interestingly, they sort of breed true that those people who were not agitated when they come to the care home usually do not become agitated. They remain. It's as if there is a particular problem and that continues. So what to do? Ask the person what's wrong. So that's the first thing to do, because sometimes they can tell you. If they're unable to see, think about, if it's a sudden onset, it's often a physical problem. If they weren't like that before, they often have an infection or pain or discomfort, and there's something physically wrong with them that you might be able to do something about. They may be hungry, thirsty, hot or cold or in pain. They may be frightened or anxious, bored or feeling alone, and they may have sensory isolation. They may not be able to see or hear very well, or not have people talking to them and just sitting there, and there's no input. And the more that all of us have of less input, then the more agitated and the more likely we are to begin imagining things and to become irritable. So this is some of the things we discovered in our study, which I didn't think would be true. I asked everyone what they needed and they said it's more staffing. Made no difference the level of staffing. It's not the numbers of people. I mean, below a minimum level it would, but it's not the numbers of people, it's what they do. Simply making activity available is ineffective. When we looked in care homes, what happened is if you made activities available, then the people who were not agitated did more and more and had a better time, which is fabulous. And the people who were agitated didn't do them because they caused complete disruption. Having a pleasant environment is great, because having a pleasant environment is great, but it didn't make any difference to the level of agitation, and studies in the States have found the same thing. It's great for itself, it's not great for making people less agitated. And so what we need to do, and this is what Jenny was talking about before, we need to target and tailor interventions to individuals. It's not changing the whole care home, it's thinking, what does that individual need? Changing the care home is a good thing just because it's a good thing. But you have to think about the individual. You have to look at their physical health, try and reduce their pain. I look at Jackie because I know that she'll just tell me to say this if I don't, so I'm just saying it first. Reviewing medication, teaching staff about communication. So you can imagine if somebody comes to wash you and you don't have any memory, then it feels like a physical assault. Telling them that you are going to do this and that you want to help them to be clean and saying hello to them makes a huge difference than somebody touching you in an inappropriate way, which you can't quite remember that you need. Teaching them, listening to the person with dementia, talking to them, not over them. Relationship-centered care makes a big difference. And thinking about people individually, making case conferences about someone who has a problem and individual plans, rather than just thinking about, well, this is a way to run a good care home, although we need to run good care homes as well. Interventions which do not work for agitation. Light therapy. So there's been lots of trials of light therapy where they get people sitting in front of these very intense lights, which some of you may not find. They make people worse. And when you look at them, that's maybe not very surprising. use these sorts of things as a form of torture. It's important for people not to be in the dark. Being made to sit and stare at a light is not good for your agitation. Aromatherapy may or may not be something that people like, but doesn't help agitation. And training family carers for people at home in behavioural and cognitive interventions doesn't help either. And I think that's because you're taking very stressed people and trying to teach them an entirely new concept and skill, and it's not the time in life to do it. I want to talk about sleep, partly because it's really important in care homes and partly because I'm really interested in it. So sleep disturbances are common in dementia. It's about 39% in people with Alzheimer's disease, and it's about half of the people with dementia with Lewy bodies. So, and what people have is difficulty in falling asleep, reduced overall sleep at night time, getting up at night, wandering around, going outside, getting very, very upset during the night, and excessive daytime sleep. Being asleep during the day. And if you're at home, your exhausted family probably thinks it's quite a good thing to go to sleep during the day as they try and catch up, but it has huge problems. So physically what's changed is you get suprachiasmatic nucleus degenerates. And that's the bit that does your circadian rhythm that says this is night and this is day for you. And we all know that when we lose that, when you have jet lag, you just feel rubbish. And you're really tired and you can't sleep. Inactivity and napping impact on sleep pressure. So when we fall asleep at night, by the time late at night, we have this sleep pressure. Our body tells us it's time to go to bed. Sleep during the day and your body stops telling you that. People have decreased ability to capture and transmit light. And that's because of eye disease, which becomes, as we get older, more and more universal. People with dementia have physical illnesses as well as having dementia, so they often have pain, they may be on medication that keeps them awake, and they may not be able to tell you that they're in pain. And they may even deny they're in pain because they don't completely understand the question or understand exactly what the input is. So for example, my father, when he developed a rare type of dementia, fell and had a fractured neck of femur, and I went to the hospital and I said, give him painkillers. And they said, he tells me he's not in pain. And I said, he's had fractured neck of femur, he's sweating and he's screaming, take a wild guess, give him some analgesics. The environment makes a huge difference. The temperature, too hot or too cold, the amount of noise and the amount of light, controlling those at night and during the day. And people with dementia are often anxious when they wake up because they don't know where they are. They don't know what's going on and they don't know what's happening. What works? Well, bright light and cognitive behavioral therapy works in other populations, but it doesn't work in dementia by itself. And if you think that for most people there are multiple reasons why they're not sleeping, then why would it work by itself? There's pilot studies which show potential benefits, and we are currently doing a large study. We need 370 people, I think we're at 310 of a randomized controlled trial, combining light with sleep education, hygiene, exercise, daytime activities. Be careful about sleep drugs, hypnotics, lead to fractures, falls and strokes, and the more people have them, then the more side effects that there are of them, and that's the same, or there are similar problems with other drugs which are not benzodiazepines like diazepam, temazepam or zolpiclone. So my conclusions are behavioural problems are part of dementia. It's really important to understand that people are not behaving in a particular way on purpose. Individualised care. Good care includes medical, social, supportive care, and it's tailored to individual cultural needs, as happens here, preferences and priorities. Care for the family as well, they're all part of it. Intervene individually to help symptoms, think of that individual person and what their problems might be and tailor it. Use medication only if the risk or distress can't be managed with psychosocial treatment, with these sorts of things that I've been talking about, and the risk is greater than the risk of medication. And we've got the evidence, technology and capacity to substantially improve dementia care. And I'm pleased that all of us are part of that here. So thank you for your attention. And I've learned from Claire that I'm supposed to ask, does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Do you want a microphone so that people can hear you?
I'm Sheila, I'm a resident at Hammerson House. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? You haven't mentioned the word Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I did mention it once or so. Dementia is an overall term for people who begin to lose their memory, judgment, and functioning. And there are different types of dementia, and the most common one is Alzheimer's disease. So it's a subset of dementia. Everyone with Alzheimer's dementia has a dementia, but not everyone with dementia has Alzheimer's.
I'm Millie. Shall I stand up? I just wanted to ask at a certain point in dementia whether, apart from the family, is there actually any benefits to making sure that dementia patients would have a normal sleeping pattern?
Yes, that's very interesting, because that was a question that I was asking when we would ask people with dementia whether they slept well, and they would tell us they did, and the family would say they've been up all night. And I thought, well, who are we treating? But if you, first of all, if you look, and going back to what Claire was talking about, the relationship with quality of life, people who sleep less who sleep badly have much less quality of life. They also, in care homes, what happens is they sleep during the day, they miss meals sometimes, they miss hydration, they're more likely to fall, and they do physically much worse. So they're more mentally and physically, it makes a huge difference to them, even if they don't remember that they slept badly. Okay, looks like we're done, and thank you very much. Oh, I'm very sorry, I missed it. Go on.
Hi, good morning. I'm Nuno. I'm the Director of Care for Nightingale Hammerson. Thank you, Gill, for the lovely presentation. And I was shocked, and perhaps everybody in the room is shocked, when you say it's not about the numbers of team members working in the care home, but about the quality of the care. So it's not about the number of team members, it's not about the number of activities that are provided to the residents. So share a bit more about that, please, because I think that we need to be challenged with those outcomes from the study. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so this is a big study we did of over 100 care homes in Britain, and like Nuno, I thought obviously more staff, better care, more activities, better care. But and that's true to an extent, because if you have no staff, then you don't get any care. However, there are minimum staffing requirements. So all care homes have minimum staffing requirements. Over and above that, as I said, what happens is that for the people with difficult behaviours who are difficult to engage, unless there is targeted intervention, they just don't get the activities. They are, it's the people who go and enjoy them, and they're very rewarding to do activities with, who get them, and the other ones don't. And when we talked to staff about it, they would tell us, they told us that it's not that they wanted to, but there was a huge feeling that if somebody is likely to insult them, to refuse to do things, insult them, shout at them, then of course they wanted to avoid them. Don't we all? We're all human beings. Now, I'm not saying they do avoid them. They obviously give them basic care and make sure, as far as they can, that they're washed and dressed and have food. But they try, the staff, unless you think about it as an individual and what you can do, they don't get the activities, and again, they don't get the extra care. There are people, it's very rewarding to look after people in a care home. if they smile at you and talk to you. Others less so, and we're all human beings.
Oh, that was great. My question is, what do you do? How do you help other residents in care homes cope with people with dementia whom they're sharing their living accommodation with?
I think that most care homes, though not all care homes, now try to have more specific areas where people who don't have dementia are living, and people with dementia, and they also have they look at the physical space and the possibilities. But I mean, I can't go on like this forever, but they're telling you about studies. But a very interesting study who looked at home-like homes, care homes, and people did really badly in them. And I think that's because they had no choice about who they were sharing their living spaces with. And their home-like homes hadn't worked. That's why they were in a care home. And then they go there with people who they don't love, and who might be really quite difficult, and they can't cope with them. So you have to begin to think about what it's like to live with somebody who in a particular, and part of your plan has to be about the other residents. And one of the things I didn't talk about sleep disturbance is that when people get up, they go into other people's bedrooms, partly because they don't know which is their own, and partly because they don't really know why they shouldn't. And it's very frightening for somebody to be woken up in the middle of a night with a stranger trying to come into bed with them. So there's a huge amount of care and planning that has to go. It's a very difficult job looking after people in care homes, and to do it well. So I agree with Claire, you need a minimum data set, but the data set is to look and see whether, is to look when things aren't working and look at what they are. It's a huge thing. And I also agree with her that things that are obvious are not always true. So we don't know the answer until we've done the research.
Hi, yes, I have not a question, but a confirmation rather from someone online who says that they have found as well that sometimes there's a disconnect between very detailed activity programs, good staffing levels, but they don't always relate to people's individual needs. Kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, which does not work. So they're agreeing. Thank you.
And I'm sharing a question that came from one of our household managers at Nightingale House that cannot be here. So he's asking about the mental health support for care homes. So something that has been observed in the past couple of years is that the NHS services are providing less mental health support, and I'm talking about old age psychiatry and psychologists, when the needs are seen to be higher, and we want to have a much more non-pharmacological approach to support the residents. Do you have any recipe to improve this situation?
I'm not responsible for all old age psychiatrists and psychologists, although I am an old age psychiatrist. And I think that over the last couple of years and with pandemics, it's really been a huge problem. And I think you have to talk to the teams. What's changed now is most services, not all, have care home liaison teams. And they have to talk to them about the service and what can be provided and what you want. As well as what they think that they can provide. But we all know, I mean, I heard it in the news this morning, and we all hear it in the news every day. It's difficult in the NHS at the moment. It's very, very difficult. There's a lot of needy and ill people, but I think it's really important to communicate and try and discuss what can be done, and people coming into care homes. And I suppose one thing as a professional is I'm pleased to hear that you want them, you feel that they help, and that's good to know. So I have no overall answer, apart from I suppose the other thing is to go to the commissioners and say, this is our, we need this. And the sickest people, or many of the sickest people, are living in care homes, and many, not all, but many of these people at the beginning of my career would have been living in hospitals and living a really quite bad quality of life in hospitals. But you know, there has to be some sort of recognition that care homes need support, need help. Okay, this time I really am finished. Thank you very much.